beginning of the end for you.
To the sky!
Bestowed upon you the power of the sun.
A mighty sword!
Strike while the iron's hot.
For Camelot! For Avalon!
Let the heavens rain! I am Ragnarok!
It's Friday, and that means the SPL is back here for this weekend. We've had roster changes, we've had upsets, we've had pentakills, and well, actually, you know what? We're going to get to this fun fact here in just a second, Gormizer. I don't want to spoil it just yet. We're going to get to it.
You got me on the hook already.
That's right. Reeling you in. That's right. Don't tune out now. You got a fun fact just around the corner. Another fun fact is we want to thank Prime for being with us here this year in the SPL. And there's some really good stuff this month, free with Prime. Free Anara skin if you're into Paladins, and then free Monster Cat Crab Rave Bundle. Say that 5 times fast for SMITE here this month with Prime. Of course, thanks again to Prime for being with us here all year in Season 9 of the SMITE Pro League. Make sure you at home get the full value of your Prime membership and all of the awesome free stuff you get each month with Prime Gaming. My name is Dolson. Gormizer joins me. And Gore, we're still not at the fun facts. Not just yet. We're going to be there in just a moment.
You want my fun fact real fast?
Yeah,
it's real hard to say Monster Cat Crab Rave Bundle 5 times fast.
I
faltered on 3.
I had to look over at it, and even
you
still.
said say it 5 times fast, and I started muttering to myself, and it falls apart real quick.
I couldn't say it 1 time fast.
The bundle itself does not fall apart.
No, it does not. It's
saying
fantastic.
it 5 times fast, hard.
And apparently only a couple of days left on that, so make sure you jump in and get it. Gore, last week in the SPL, some fantastic matchups.
Yeah.
All of them 2-0, though. It
Yeah.
seems like there's some parity here, but everyone's beating everyone. It's not like one half of the teams are beating the other half of the teams. It just feels like everyone's kind of beating up on one another. So will this weekend in the SPL feature a 3-game set? You'd have to imagine with some of the matchups that we've got today that one of them would go 3 is what you would normally think. Kings versus Bolts, and then Dragons versus Leviathans. What a Friday.
I think set 2 goes 3 today.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too.
Immediately, I'm ready to make bets on that.
If I had to bet. And then Valks versus Scarabs,
Yeah.
those are 2 teams pretty close to one another. Warriors versus Titans. Out of those 4, gotta be a 3-gamer.
You have to imagine. I'm actually really excited, and this one's fun for me because, like, Valks Scarabs, right? We've been talking about it. Scarabs have been in it just a tumultuous world and team point all year, essentially, right? And honestly, even going into last year, things like that. The Valks, though, are struggling against that squad. I mean, even, they beat the Levi's this year. They beat the Kings this year. They beat the Bolts earlier. But they've not beaten the Scarabs once this year. And that's a big deal to me. So being able to see if this team is truly on the up and up, if they get a win like that tomorrow, that's actually like maybe one of my more important matches of the week and maybe of the phase, because I think that's really going to dictate some things down there at the bottom.
Yeah, we have been separated, top half versus bottom half of the league up to this point, where the top teams, the 1 or 2 losses they have been to one another in sort of a weird round robin type thing. There's been some folks out there doing power rankings for the SPL. I don't envy that because I think Dragons probably still up top despite losing a couple weeks ago.
For sure.
But like the rest
Scream
of the
just
top
got a
4,
pentakill. Yes, they're on top.
They have to be. Gore, I want to spoil the fun fact now though, and this might actually be a little scary. It's one of those existential things.
Boom, boom.
After Sunday, we're halfway through Phase 3. We're going to be halfway done with the phase after this weekend, which means we've got, 3 or 4 weeks left before the end of the phase, and then playoffs, and then Worlds, all of that around the corner. My goodness. We are sprinting through the end of the year here, which means that the SMITE World Championships live with fans happening very, very soon. Let's talk about this first matchup, though. We've got the Kings and the Bolts going toe-to-toe with one another. Now, the Camelot Kings, they're a team for a while, Gore. We're the far and away number 1 team in the league, right? And then everyone else was kind of competing for 2 through 8.
Yeah.
Has dropped off a bit, but only a bit, because the Jade Dragons kind of high-octane, in-your-face. The Camelot Kings, still a very, very clean, very, very objective-minded team. And a lot of that centers around their jungler in Captain Twig. And Twig has had to be very flexible with a lot of his god picks recently. Wheelix, Naja, Hunbats. in the last 6.
Yeah.
Those are the 3 he's played. So been a bit of everything from Captain Twig.
This whole phase, I think, has been a really look. I see the 1.57. That's just the style that Twig plays, right?
Yep.
I would honestly equate it in a similar way to Scream, but very different reasons. In the fact that they're both going to go in and they might get a kill, they might die, right? It might go 1 for 1 every single time. But the way he plays, I think, is just so foundational for this squad. Fits so well with the way that the Kings want to. Can get active early on. You can see a level 5 gank here already. Has, like you said, I think in this meta, a very good god pool that's working with the assassins that are kind of up towards the top. And even the ones that maybe aren't towards the top, he's making work like they belong up there. I think that he has been a very phenomenal player. I mean, there's a reason he's the only one who's made it to every single world championship that it has existed. And I think that what we've gotten to see out of him this phase has been a lot more what you can expect from Twig, right? And like you said, hasn't been as perfectly clean as physically possible, but that's fine. I like the fact that they're kind of ramping into the phase, that they're kind of rising up to the top, because you don't want to be at the top the whole time.
No, and what's unfortunate for their opponents today, and that's the Bolts and Lasbra, is that Twig and the Kings have played.
One's trending up, one's trending down.
Yeah, near perfect smite here recently, and so, God, I don't know. I mean, we talk about Lasbra out of the jungle, who had a fantastic first couple of phases here for this Bolts team. In the last 6 games, has had 1 kill in 4 of them.
Yeah.
And then 4 kills and 3 kills in the other 2. And so Lasbra just has not been able to consistently get it going. And this is not a shot at Lasbra, because nobody on the Bolts has really been able to consistently get things going. This is a team that had one of the longest win streaks of all time, I mean, and so I think the Bolts now, they got to lean on Laz. You got to hope Ven is able to do a little bit more in matchups like this, but against such a clean team in the Camelot Kings score, very difficult for the Bolts today.
I think, when you look at the Kings, you can say if Twig does well or falters, the Kings can still win or lose. For the Bolts, that's not as true. Like, if Lasbra has a bad game, the team has a bad game. If Lasbra has a great game, the team can have a great game, but at the same time, the team can slip up a little bit. And that's kind of where the big issue has been. I keep track of things like, okay, what comps are the Bolts losing against? What gods are they losing against?
Yeah.
But right now, I mean, they're just losing, right? They played 12 games. They've only won 3 of them. So if you've got a 25% hit rate, it doesn't really matter what the other team's running. You're just not quite getting there. One of the games that they've won, they were able to pick up a Cabrakan. They've only won 1 from first pick, things like that. So I really do think that this is a team that when you're specifically looking in the jungle, you are looking at getting Lasbra on something that he can play and that he can pop off on. Unfortunately for them, like the Daji is one of the most banned gods against them. Also unfortunate for them, but the Pele pickup that usually is good for Lasbra has not been winning games specifically for them. And so I think they really need to focus in on the jungle and try to get that lift up as possible.
Yeah, good or bad news, depending on how you want to spin it for the Bolts, that we're almost halfway done with the phase. You could say there's still a lot of time to grow, but also only one more round robin through a lot of these teams to get things going prior to Worlds. Camelot Kings versus the Olympus Bolts hopefully remains a very exciting matchup. We sat down with Captain Twig and Lasbra, respectively, going into this big matchup.
It was a mixed week. I think we learned a lot about how we want to play identity-wise. I think we gained a huge confidence boost in maybe late game and shot calling plays, but also learned a lot about different ways we can get owned in picks and bans, and maybe, I guess it just opened up a conversation for us on how we want to adapt as the weeks go on.
In this past week, we definitely have to work a little bit on our draft and how to transition into the mid game. We've been struggling a little bit, and once we have a bit mid game, it becomes hard to play the late game. So our mid game, from 7 to 15 minutes, is where it's really been hard for us to get going.
So the Bolts, I guess it's easiest to say they are a jungle-led team. Lasbra, from the perception I get from the team, he seems like their leader, or at least their leader through the early mid-game, in terms of where they play, where they look for fights, where they skirmish. I think they're adapting a little bit to the way Baskin wants to play the solo lane, or maybe Baskin's adapting to the way they want to play the game. So they've had a little bit of a rocky road, but I'd say they're a jungle-led team, which often leads to the most important part of the game being the early game.
The playstyle of the Kings, they're typically very, very good in drafting, and they typically know what they want to go for. And whatever their draft is, they also play around that draft, whether it's for late game, or they want to give up some stuff, or they want to play like a little bit harder in the early game. But they tend to be like a late game team and have like good team comfort late game.
Oh, and so, you know, I think similar interviews, but totally different team states for both of those players, where Captain Twig thinking, oh, you know, we still have a lot to work on. I think an okay week, but still have plenty of room to grow. Heard similar words from Lasbra, but one of the teams really has a lot of momentum to start picking up here towards the back half as we round out the first half of the phase, as we get towards the end of the phase here. And it's got to be the Olympus Bolts. One thing Lasbra shouts out in that interview there, Gore, is drafting. And I think absolutely a great step forward in the right direction, right? But I think there are games where I'm feeling like the Bolts are getting out-drafted. I do think there are some games where you go in and the Bolts just don't have as good a team comp as the opposing squad, but play on field hasn't quite stepped up for the Bolts yet either. We'll get into picks and bans for game one as we continue this discussion just a bit forward. And so I just think there's a lot here, Gore, and I think that the talent's still there for the Bolts, of course,
for
right?
sure.
I mean, this is you replace Haddix with Baskin, which, you know, Baskin hasn't quite, you know, knocked it out of the park. It's not like he's been playing poorly, but nobody on the Bolts has been playing fantastically. Had a really good game on Guan Yu 5-0-7 against the Leviathans.
Highest KDA on the Bolts, too.
Right, so it's been looking good for Baskin. I don't know. I think this is the type of team that just needs to see one go in.
Yeah.
Needs to get a win. I don't know if it happens against the Kings today, but like gives me the idea that once this team starts believing that they're all right
capable
again,
of it,
that it might start kind of coming together.
It's really interesting spot for them to be in. You know, a lot of these teams, they actually for the longest time had one of the lowest franchise loss streaks since we flipped over to this, right? Since we started franchising the teams, to the point where they had only ever lost 2 in a row. Every single time after they lost 2, they'd pick up a win. So last week was the first time that they'd lost a third after that. And so that's counting up. And you know, that puts them in familiar territory, right? The Kings have only ever lost max 3 in a row. Leviathans have only ever lost max 3 in a row so far since they switched to these team names and became kind of the franchises we know. But it does mean this is kind of murky waters for the Bolts, right? Like all of a sudden, you weren't able to turn it around. Granted, your last matchup was against the Dragons, so that wasn't that easy. Same thing for the Kings, right? Their last matchups, an 0-2 loss to the Leviathans. They still feel mostly solid, but then again, Shinto went like 13-1 on Vulcan in one of those games. Like, I think that what we're really seeing, I think, for the Bolts and even, you know, the Kings, they mentioned it, but like they said, it's figuring out draft, but then I think for the Bolts, it goes way beyond that. It's not just the draft phase. There's a lot of play-on-field stuff that they're going to have to work on, because otherwise, I think at least some of these last few sets would have been a lot closer. Last win was up against the Scarabs there in week 1, and so, like you said, I think they're very much in the mindset of needing to turn that around.
Well, starting out with a Vulcan, never a bad thing, right? We just saw what Vulcan was able to do at the SEC level. And look, okay, so this is ridiculous. In the last six that the Bolts have played, only one individual game win. So the Bolts are 1-5 in individual games, not sets. Well, they're 1-4 in sets over the last 5, but 1-5 in individual games. The one win was Ven on Vulcan against the Leviathans. He went 3-0-10, so clearly it's a good look. And hasn't played Vulcan outside of that in the last 6 games here for the Bolts.
And I'm also really interested in their jungle pickup, because even though I said, like, for them it hasn't been doing well, Pele, I think for the Bolts specifically, has a 20% win rate. Last week, Pele had a 100% win rate.
Yeah.
And so it is definitely, like, it's something that's in Lasbra's wheelhouse. I think works well, you know, when you get the knockup. Like, that's a lot of good CC, good lockdown that you could match with a Vulcan. A lot of, amazing burn, right? You can factor in a Pele ult, the smacks that are after that, plus then just a backfire. Yep. Probably killing anybody that's standing in your way, except for the Ymir now that's locked in on the other side. Yep. So I think that again, my focus is on Vin, as you had highlighted, because I think it's incredibly important for the Vulcan and for Vin to be comfortable. I think it's important for Bear to be comfortable, because you don't want either of those lanes starting to fall behind. You had mentioned it, and I'll reiterate it, but Baskin is the highest KDA on the team so far this phase, so I think solo lane has been doing okay enough. It's making sure that their lane phase doesn't get so egregious, that Bear is not 2 levels behind, Vin doesn't fall 2 levels behind. Lasbra's being able to be a big impact player, and then on top of all that, they are keeping, I think, a good transition into some of those later team fights, which is going to be admittedly a lot more Baskin-based, right? When one of your frontliners has to jump in, you're going to need someone like that is leading it. But I think we've been seeing Baskin slowly warm back up to the SPL, and it has definitely been making a huge impact.
Good shout there, Core. Pele locked in for Lasbro at a 61% win rate across the league, and then Ardio at a 75% win rate across the league. Now, Ardio has seen play both solo and support, so definite flex potential there. Suppose could go to Awesome Jake, could go to Baskin. Though hasn't been much RDO for Awesome Jake. And so maybe leaves that one over towards the solo lane. Remains to be seen, though.
Yeah.
This is a Camelot Kings classic. Naja, Ymir, and Kukul Khan Gore. Those 3. Think back to when the Kings were still playing from Ping. A couple of them over in Europe. Only a couple of them able to make it into studio last year. This was the style of composition they still chose to play despite needing everything to be on point. And that's how they really started to figure out their style. This is about as classic Kings as it gets. Set up, knockdown, small spaces, and you trust big man tanks to hit those ults.
Oh, absolutely. And I trust him even more when you've got a Naja Sash just there. Or a Naja ult, right? I mean, like, no matter what you're set up, but you've got Naja Sash, you've got your own slow. So we've seen Big Man Jings hit free fire Cuckoo ults in the jungle. I mean, you're talking narrow corridors, a bunch of people that do not have any wild displacement. I mean, Vulcan, Pele, Ardio are not going to dodge that fast. They have to do it the old-fashioned way, run perpendicular to the line that it's fired on and just hope for the best. But now you've got the Naja Sash, the Naja ult, the Ymir freeze, Ymir slows on top of that, Ymir walls to lock people in. I think that just the 3 they have synergize so well that they're mid 3v3. If you assume that this RDO is support, or even if you throw it over into solo and you add anything else onto the other side for Jake, I think their mid 3v3 is just stronger on the Kings right now.
Well, square one, and this is, Lasber talking about how a lot of what the Bolts needed to do better was figure out their drafting. So square one is just don't get beaten handedly in draft by the Kings, right? Give yourself a chance. I've always said this, especially, and I'm not harshing on the Bolts necessarily when I say this, but when we look at lopsided matchups, traditionally what I say is at least give if you're on the non-favored team, you have to give yourself an opportunity out of picks and bans. You can't lose in picks and bans and then not be favored in game and then go into game and expect just a giant upset. And so that's what I'm looking for here for the Bolts is give yourself an opportunity. And hopefully clean up a bit of the drafting issues that you've seen.
I like this.
I think with the Odin locked in, that does put Ardio over in support. Odin then over in the solo lane. Jabalanke for Barracuda. But X-Ball Gore, 0% win rate only across 2 games. Just hasn't found the success just yet this phase.
Yeah, honestly, that one was one that Bear was playing as a comfort pick most of the time. I think that he's going to be solid here, though. I mean, you've got, again, very similar on the Kings. Like, if you want to talk about the Bolts not having a lot of people who can move, now Odin with a leap, X-Ball with a leap. But, like, Ishtar, Cuckoo, Naja, like, it's going to be a lot of very easy targets, I think, for Bear to trace in the late game. But you're also looking at a lot of very easy targets for an Odin cage. I think that's, like, Phantom Shell, all of a sudden, like, that, the priority of that skyrockets in this game because of the amount of walls. The great walls that we've seen out of genetics on the Ymir, assuming that it is genetics on the Ymir. So knowing that he's going to be playing that, the walls that he brings to the table and the equation are just monstrous, and so I think that forces a little bit of that from the Bolts and a Phantom Shell, but like Odin Cage is absolutely important for you. You do not have a single soul on the Kings that can escape that if it gets locked down.
I actually think that Odin ends up being a really good pick/ban for the Bolts here. Think back to the set against the Titans where the Kings won 2-0. Back-to-back Odin games for variety in that set, and so Mulan ends up being the pick for variety here. Ability to still get aggressive, a little bit of lockdown and mobility there, but I think Odin ends up being kind of flexible here for the Olympus Bolts because Odin Cage plus Ymir Wall plus Naja Sash, all of that, and then there's even a little lockdown with Ishtar. A lot of this would be funneling for big man Tings, and so it ends up being Odin for the Bolts, and then Mulan the final pick here for variety. The last pick, Mulan, does that change the dynamic much in your mind, or is that more just a pick for variety to potentially make some side plays happen and stay aggressive out of the solo lane.
I think some side plays to happen. Again, if I'm looking at it, it's more lockdown, right? It feels very much like funnel into big man teams and the Ishtar as well, right? I have to give the credit where credit's due. I think the carries here are going to do really well. But if I'm looking at the Naja, I'm not looking at Naja for kills. If I'm looking at the Mulan, I'm not looking at the Mulan for kills. Maybe something that can happen in lane. But realistically, I'm looking at the Kings as a team fight because that's what they like to play for. And I see a lot of devastation in the long lanes, essentially, for the Bolts. The further this game goes on, I think the more control the Kings are going to have. A lot of emphasis on how this Odin does. If I remember correctly, I was looking at it, this is Jake's first RDO game, at least for this phase, so that's going to be very important to see how that works out overall for the Bolts. But also, and I keep harping on it, but I'm going to come back to it until it pops off, how this Pele does for them. I think that's going to be incredibly important because if Lasbra has a great game, if he's able to outpace and kind of outscale this Naja early on, be more impactful, get Vin ahead, maybe even help over in the long lane, the left side, help Shablanke get above that Ishtar, all of a sudden I think you're in a position where if the Bolts can get a lead, maintain the lead, they can at least start taking some of those team fights and feel even.
Well, think back. I mean, there's a reason Pele was banned against Lasbra all the time at the beginning of this phase. Teams just not letting Lasbra play this Pele. Pele has not won the last couple of times we've seen Lasbra play it for the Bolts, however. So, time to reverse the course now for the Olympus Bolts. Yep. Bolt versus King start off this weekend in the SPL, and it's game one with J-Mac in Mifflin.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave and Gore. Olympus Bolts and Camelot Kings, one of the top of the leagues in the Camelot Kings, and a team that's been struggling for the Olympus Bolts have only found a single set win so far this phase up against the Solar Scarabs earlier on, but since then has been a downhill slope for the Olympus Bolts, trying to make sure that Lasbra has something to pop off on, though, Mifflin. This Pele, in the past, has been a quintessential pick for this player, has been one of Lasbra's best performances, but he's going to really need to pull it out if he wants to find something against the Kings today.
But I'm looking at the composition from the Camelot Kings, and I'm hard-pressed to find an individual pick where I'm thinking to myself, man, Pele feels really, really good here. I think maybe best-case scenario, Netrioid, some early ganks from Lasbra over towards the duo lane could help out, but once Netrioid gets access to that ultimate, it becomes very, very difficult to deal with Ishtar as a kind of dedicated melee pick. So I'm curious to see how this one does pan out. I tend to agree with what Gore said on the desk. I really like this Kings draft. It plays into their style very, very well. It's one that they're very adept at playing. Each one of these individual picks at times has been associated with these players. And there are some pretty nice counter matchups for the Kings. We were talking about how struggling to find a spot for Lasbra to get involved. Twig's got some pretty key targets that are going to be easy to lock down. Barracuda with the Rising Jaguar, it's very easy for a Sash to catch that on startup frames. Then on this Vulcan, Vulcan's best defensive utility, with the thing that every single Vulcan player does is, hey, I'm going to run into the jungle, I'm going to point the turret to where I'm running, you don't want to walk past it. Well, you just created a spawn point for him to ring toss, right? Captain Twig's just going to apply that slow and potentially a double bounce pretty easily.
A little bit of action by Laz on the Captain Twig. Throws out the double Pyroclast. Gets at least a little bit of damage, but Captain Twig's not too worried about that. It'll be first totem going over to the Camelot Kings. And this solo lane matchup, not one that we've seen in a while. I mean, typically we don't see very much Odin. Mulan has kind of popped herself up here with the rise of Hades over in the solo. We've seen that kind of sometimes be an answer. It's getting some extra bullying. But how do you kind of feel about this matchup in solo, especially as we start kind of moving towards the later stages of the game?
When Odin is in the meta, and coming from the console league, Odin was always in the meta.
Right.
We used to say, look, whatever you want in solo, you want something that's either going to just survive lane and get like some sort of sustain to match all that damage that Odin's got, or you want to be able to avoid or blitzkrieg that shield.
Jake goes down for first blood. Netrioid comes up with the early pick, the horrific emblem pop by Genetics, plus the slows extra coming from the Ymir, make it basically a root onto Awesome Jake. And the Camelot Kings are able to pick up first blood on the Bolts.
Man, Jake's been struggling in that early laning phase recently. He really has consistently fallen down around that second, third wave. Those purple buff invades haven't necessarily been going his way either, in spite of the set, or rather, throughout consistent sets, has really struggled throughout that early phase. Good punish from the Camelot Kings, and you gotta play wary in situations like that. If you don't have a standard leap, Ymir's passive, all that slows from the Glacial Strike really do make it difficult to escape, and with horrific emblem as well, Jake really doesn't have a great answer.
So Jake will be a little bit behind to start this one out. Variety almost goes down to returning rocks after Captain Twig on the run back towards the tower. And neither of them can really stick around for this blue. It's going to take a nice ring bounce from Captain Twig, a teleport in from Variety to try and help get some fight after. But blue buff was able to go that way. Captain Twig falling low. Knockup is good. Variety is here. Finds the grapple to pull Lasbro away. But it's a 1-for-1 trade out. Baskin finds the pick onto one. Variety grabs a pick on another one and makes it a 1-for-1 trade.
Variety should be able to walk down this blue buff immediately. Baskin already has his own, so won't lose out on the mana sustain. Good decision. I think had Baskin decided to dedicate himself to trying to confirm this, likely would have cost him his life. Variety already picking up that steel mail means he's just going to win out in that DPS trade every single time. But to go back to that question you had asked a little bit earlier, the Mulan versus Odin matchup, expect to see Variety dumping his entire kit into Odin every single time he uses that second ability. Mulan is very, very good at applying damage quickly and should make it a lot more difficult for Baskin to clear these waves, which is generally what Odins do. It's, hey, I jumped on the wave, then I went between the towers and jumped on the wave, and then I went to your back camps and jumped on that, right? It's I've got a whole lot of clear, and it's very quick, even though it's not the highest kill potential god in the solo.
Now, something that the desk was talking a lot about was kind of the funnel capability that the Camelot Kings have. You catch somebody in a corridor, and they might as well be dead. I mean, you have a Kukulkan's going to be able to cover just about any of those options. Captain Twig can pull anybody through over there as well. Netroid can drop out that ultimate. I think we actually get to take a look back at the kill from just a moment ago that happened in that solo lane. At this point, this is where Variety had just gone back to base. He's now making his teleport back in. So we did see the blue buff at least get invaded out there, Captain Twig and whatnot, but at least kind of going back to the question I was going through, was how does it, at least for the Olympus Bolts, you know, they've got an Odin and they've got nobody on the Camelot Kings who can get out of that cage naturally. Netroid finds the ult, but still ends up going down at the end of the day. But how do the Olympus Bolts, you know, is this just pure advantage for them because there's nobody who can deal with cage outside of a shell?
Well, pure advantage, it's hard to say, right? I mean, obviously circle-on-circle ultimate between Odin and Vulcan is going to be very hard to deal with for this King's draft, but Phantom Shell is pretty valuable and is, I believe, pretty easy to apply in a lot of these team fights. It's pretty clear when an Odin is going in just to try and burn your shell as opposed to when an Odin is going in trying to set up for his team.
3 versus 3. Ting's on the way. Drops Tornado to cut Barracuda. Twig takes Lasbra in the sky. Doesn't have a whole lot of damage yet.
See ya.
But the combo between the support and the mid will destroy Lasbra. Wall cuts off the path of Awesome Jake. Captain Twig, big man Ting throwing out the damage. The sash to lock him in. And the Camelot Kings to find their fourth.
An overstay from the Olympus Bolts and a massive rotation from the Camelot Kings. I think the Bolts have to accept in that situation. Look, we used a lot to kill Netroid. A lot of ultimates are down, don't really have much left in the tank, a little bit of HP sacrifice as well. It's worth it to get that kill and then let your own purple buff go. But because the Olympus Bolts tried to have their cake and eat it too, get the kill and take the buff, just gave over so much time to the Kings to rotate through and turn around that fight entirely. Got to sing the praises of Genetics holding onto that wall to deal with the dash from Jake. Perfect timing from that. Got to talk about the ultimate synergies, the three-man ultimate combo between Tings, Genetics, and Twig. Very, very well timed there as well. Just tough situations. Both the Bolts and the Kings have got these wombo combos that can completely change these team fights.
And it's plays like that that we always kind of question. You know, when we were seeing this Naja get picked up before, it was throwing things like Hunters in the mid or these very lower DPS mages, not the initial kind of burst style down there. Because when you think of the Naja, I mean, especially for how long, you know, you and I have been in SMITE, you think Naja, you think Raw ult, Thoth ult, Kukulkan ult, anything that's big and immediate does, you know, 500 to 1,000 damage, you know, early in scaling up in what later. That's kind of the OG style of play. And Captain Twig caught out. We'll be fine for now. Stun. Takes Jacob into the air to delay some time. Lands down into the middle of 3. Stun is good. Lasbra, credit to the kill. But can there be some follow-up from the Camelot Kings? Venena's bead's gone. Tornado dropped, and that should be the end of the engage for the Kings.
Good option from Ven to step forward there. Had he continued walking backwards, would have taken a whole lot of damage from those tornadoes. Instead, realizes, look, Squall's down, or Zephyr rather. I can step up, reapply some damage, avoid the tornado, and potentially turn around that fight. So I'm loving what we're seeing from the Olympus Bolts. In spite of falling down in a couple of these skirmishes, still remaining proactive on the map, trying to put pressure onto Captain Twig in the jungle, and ensure that if you do pressure Captain Twig, the core, the setup of this Camelot Kings combo takes a major hit. If he's not using Windfire wheels aggressively, if he's not able to hold on to it where his team's nearby and able to follow up with relative ease, really, how are you setting up the majority of these fights? It really just comes down to genetics at that point.
Also, Jake able to steal a couple of offerings away. Gets a trebuchet for his team. And maybe thankfully, because Netroid was very low in mana during that, didn't have much to stop him from doing so. There was a rotation from Big Man Tings, but not a whole lot of kill pressure on Awesome Jake, who still had the dash to get away. So first trebuchet going over to the Bolts gives them a little bit of potential pressure in that dual lane. It's definitely a place where they're going to need it. About a half level down in both of the roles for there. And with a rotation from Captain Twig, unlikely that we'll see Barracuda get this purple buff anytime soon.
Smart decision from the Bolts there. Lazara's not in range to follow up, so even had the Bolts try to defend that purple, would have likely been a 3 versus 2 for a bit longer than they're comfortable with. So instead, let this one go, get some vision out, make sure you're able to rotate through for the next spawn of the purple buff. Take a peek at these ADC builds, though. There's been a slight change in itemization. Devourer's Gauntlets as opposed to the Transcendence. A trade that we've seen very often throughout the years. Shiba Lanke, one that really utilizes Transcendence well. But the penetration you now get from Devourer's Gauntlets, so strong.
Captain Twig takes Baskin to the sky. Kukulkan on landing. The damage output out of Big Man Tings is already starting to get a little ridiculous this early on. And that's against one of the tankier members of the squad. But to be noted, no magic defense on Baskin to really be able to deal with that just yet.
No, not quite, but that was difficult timing. Twig must have realized that really it was just Big Man Tings barely in range.
Lasbra hit by the knock-up, hit by the arrow after. Captain Twig finds the sash, but perfect time for Lasbra with that Volcanic Lightning. Will get him back to the safety of the Tier 1 tower. But this feels like a different Camelot Kings than we're used to. I mean, we talk back with the Kings during their media day. They're like, we're a team that's going to sit back and unapologetically kind of bore you to death in winning, but they're playing very aggressive in this early game.
Yeah, but when we had talked to the Kings, it was literally, I believe it was Twig who had said, look, I'm sorry. I know the fans, they want faster paced games, and we want them to. We're going to try to expedite that process. No longer is it going to be 10 minutes, 1 kill. We're trying to really step up our pressure throughout the early. And, well, the Dragons had said to me that it's just propaganda, and the Kings have always been a pressure-based team, which I can agree with to a certain degree. They pressure through objectives. They pressure through Greater Scorpions and Pyromancers as such.
Pyromancer will go to the Kings. No contest by the Olympus Bolts. And kind of our first actual lead of the game now. A 1K gold for the Kings. Vulcan ult. Scorpion's already gone, so not much that's going to come from there. Good damage output by Ven onto Genetics, though. Just with the initial damage of the backfire plus that first turret shot, gets a little bit of damage towards Genetics. Also hasn't really built too much dedicated defense in that regard. A lot of HP does come from that Mail of Renewal. But at least a decent heat check out of Venadu onto one of the supports this early on. Only built Flat Pen and then that Book of Thoughts. Gets him at least a decent starting power curve.
Yeah, Vulcan has never been one to struggle for damage output. Certainly has it already, 1,000 onto the Oracles there. But what I did see is an attempted play from Awesome Jake. It was an ultimate, the Earthshaker from Ven. Jake blinks forward and says, I'll stun him inside of it. Don't worry, just shoot it out. I'm going to keep him there. Unfortunately for Jake, the ultimate was out of range, and that blink doesn't go as far as it once did, so wasn't quite able to apply that CC. But it is good to see that the Olympus Bolts are looking for a proactive plays like that. Curious that it did happen on the right side of the map after Pyromancer had fallen already. Had they made that play on the left, they could have potentially, had it resulted in a pick, moved in towards the gold.
Ultimate on Barra is good. Couple more shots. Needed one more lob to get the hit. But Barracuda will walk out. Genetics a little too late on the rotation to try and stop that one. Instead, he'll soak up a little bit of farm with Netroid. But looking over towards the Soul Lane, it's something I noticed when we kind of got a pan over towards Variety, is that he's about a level and a half down on Baskin right now. Where does this extra XP come from that Baskin's been able to find? May have to hold that because the Gold Fury started up by the Kings. Vulcan ultimate used. Not going to find much. Venanu's bead's gone one more time. Captain Twig has got the ult out, but he's right in the hands of Lasbra, who's got plenty of damage to take him down. Locked in place by Netroid with a double stun by Awesome Jake. Has turned this fight on its head. Lasbra goes in, but Lasbra goes down. Venanu finds one with the Magma Bomb after, but it'll be a 2-for-1 trade for the Bolts.
But can the Bolts do anything else on the map? It's too dead for at least 10 seconds. Baskin with the aggressive positioning could potentially look towards a tower here. Suppose not exactly the option, as the Camelot Kings have already taken that Gold Fury, and the disengage does look good. Leaves them at a 3,000 gold lead in spite of losing out on the fight pretty handily immediately afterward. 2,000 rather, excuse me. The Camelot Kings have done such a good job of just strangling the map. So even in these situations where the Olympus Bolts are taking these fights and they're taking them well, there's not much to do after.
Big man Tings in danger, slowed down, swiped, but still not quite enough follow-up. Seems that the turret got destroyed mid-battle. That maybe would have been enough to get the final shots on the big man Tings. But Barracuda managed to strike down the first Tier 1 tower of the game. Duo lane Tier 1 now removed. And that gives a little bit of pressure to Barracuda, at least to try and get him back in, because similar to Variety against Baskin, Barracuda's been falling behind to Netroid.
Yeah, that itemization difference is the real major difference maker in that duo lane. Full Executioner plus Balanced Blade as opposed to just the Balanced Blade on the side of Barracuda. Aggressive posturing from Genetics. Fortunately for Genetics, doesn't step forward. There was a 3-man core of the Olympus Bolts setting up that gank on the side. And the difference between Ishtar and Xbalanque in this matchup is a difference we used to see a whole lot between itemization. You're just going to out-sustain every single time thanks to that Devourer's Gauntlet. So if you're able to force a boxing match, and Ishtar is very good at that by having those ranged snipe autos, you can take these fights outside of Barracuda's range. And even if you are having damage returned to you, only one of them's got the sustain. So having Barracuda clear out that Tier 1 tower opens the door to earlier rotations, which is something I think Barracuda would love to be a part of. Doesn't want to stick around and have to fight Netroid.
So Blink Sash from Captain Twig, missed Venenu under the tower. And then a grapple from Variety misses Lasbra, and the wall from Genetics just a little off from locking him down there. So 2 near misses up against the Olympus Bolts. The Camelot Kings still hold up the pressure. Pyromancer up in just about a minute. Last time it was the Kings to grab that. Gold Fury went to the Kings as well just earlier on. And now the Olympus Bolts have got to figure out where they're going to draw their line of stand, where they're going to get their fight back. Venenu's beads just came back up. Perfect in time, because now Captain Twig may be going down and walks away from the ultimate, but Lasbra has come back to the fight, and goodbye Captain Twig. 4 kills for the jungler of the Bolts, 4 deaths on the jungler of the Kings.
But such an expensive punish, wasn't it? Cost you your beads, cost the blink from both Jake and Lasbra, ultimate from Ven, and just so much investment from the Olympus Bolts. Had the initial blink stun combo off of Ven's ultimate just connected, Lasbra would have been to hold on to those resources, but instead is forced to get involved in that team fight. And that's twice now. We've seen that attempted from the Bolts, and it just hasn't connected. I'd like to see a bit more consistency there.
Netroid showing off that he knows that Lasbra's lurking in the jungle. Throws out the sword ultimate. Doesn't find the stun, but at least shows presence. But has a decent cooldown waiting. But with all that pressure towards the left side of the map, gave some for the right side for the Bolts to grab a Pyromancer. Try and close up some of that gold. Now back to only about 1,000 separating these two teams. A greater Scorpion stolen by Variety. Gets the grapple onto Jake.
Could be in trouble.
But doesn't seem like the Bolts are willing to commit to this Mulan, who dove in the middle of 3. Variety will be just fine, and everybody go back to their own game, back to their farm game.
Yeah, I mean, best case, you're forcing out Variety's ultimate. The disengage was certainly there, but with Ven as close as he was, it's pretty low commitment to toss out a meatball and a backfire and take off potentially upwards of 1,000 of Variety's HP. So curious to see him just focus those back camps and let the fight fizzle immediately afterward. Now that the game has reset back to a neutral state, gotta imagine that next POI is going to be the Primal Fury on respawn about a minute out from that happening. Camelot Kings and Olympus Bolts have both got pretty strong burn potential as well as very strong confirmation. So don't imagine you see it left up to a coin toss. It really will be which one of these teams shows up first, establishes that defensive positioning, and forces the other squad to fight their way in.
I'm very curious about this third item that's kind of popped up onto Basking, because I've been seeing it kind of rise a little bit more as of recent. This Heartward Amulet kind of used to be core on supports for a little while, then we kind of saw it pop itself in and out, but specifically this Amulet of Stronghold has really been making its way back into the meta, this glyph upgrade for it. Is there any reason on that, or you think it's maybe just kind of a flavor of the month right now for some of these players?
Well, I mean, looking at how the damage is spread on this Camelot Kings draft, I think it makes sense to have your physical protections converted to magical, because the majority of bursts and actual kill pressure is coming from Big Man Tings, and at times even Genetics with a fully charged ultimate off the back of Twig's ult, whereas the physicals have pretty low damage output overall. Twig's not going to exactly one-shot you just yet until he gets a couple more items, and Netroid's gone for that standard consistent low damage over time as opposed to standard crit.
Venenu getting bullied by Variety. Grapple off the mark, but ultimate is there. Knockup is Aegis away, and Beads, ultimate from the mid laner, does find Awesome Jake, who's locked inside the tornado. Vulcan ult hits a couple, but the shell from Genetics will essentially immune out the majority of that damage. Venenu got blocked away from trying to get to the Fury, now has to go back to reset.
Variety comes up massive in that team fight, just does so much damage, it separates the entire engagement. Now the Kings can do exactly this.
Barracuda, Beads gone, dashes through the tornado, and now he's out of the
Slowed.
fight. Captain Twig finds the ring toss, finds the ultimate from max range, and Barracuda has been put down, but Captain Twig will trade out his life in return. Primal Fury still being pushed by the Camelot Kings, and they will make sure to grab that one. A 1-for-1 trade, I think, at the end of the day there, in order to find that kill and find the objective.
2-for-1 with Jake falling a little bit earlier, but the objective as well, the Camelot Kings got to be happy with how that one pans out. And that's exactly what we were talking about at the very beginning of this game. That Vulcan turret cost Barracuda his life. Ven set it up so much earlier, and Twig just bounces the ring, max range onto the turret, and then max range again onto Barracuda, and affords him that opportunity to catch up and apply that ultimate. Just crazy mechanical play there from Captain Twig to make sure that there was no fight back from the Olympus Bolts. No way for them to step up to the objective. It was either step up to the objective and coin toss it or get the guaranteed punish on a Twig, and the Bolts chose the guaranteed play.
Baskin rooted in place. Cage expended by Baskin now to get away. So it's just an ult for ult out of the solo laners. Decent amount of CDR on both of them. We'll make sure that those come up relatively soon. But having that magical defense now, you can see how little that big man Tings was doing to Bastion, at least to kind of start this one up. Only a little bit of flat pen. Now that percent pen finally online for big man Tings. Should start seeing a little bit more DPS towards these tanks.
Should be. Big man Tings certainly does have a good deal of burst with that Obsidian Shard finished up. Surprised to see him forego that Warlock staff. Feels like every time we see Kukulkan, it's that double stack, especially with some of the changes to it recently. Maybe that's why we're seeing it not as prioritized now with Warlock staff. Need the full stacks if you want the percent pen. So it takes even longer for a slow build to come online. And the Camelot Kings have played anything but slow in this match. Keeping up the pressure, looking at this tier 1 tower. Olympus Bolts slowly starting to work their way forward.
Flick in the back by Variety. Grapple misses a god, hits a wall instead. But the tier 1 tower goes down for the Camelot Kings. And they'll now make their way over towards Pyro. That's set to respawn here in just a moment. The Olympus Bolt's not really in a position to fight through. Variety is stealing away a red buff. Will Laspera take the 1v1? He'll be able to at least secure the red. That way Venenu has that. But Venenu's not going to be able to make it over in time. Pyromancer still hasn't spawned in just yet. Blink Cage by Baskin to get the fight started out. Immediate Phantom Shell by Genetics to get him and his mid laner out. But Venenu is stuck on the wrong side of the wall. The beads are gone. The ultimate from Netroid and an ult from Variety will catch out Venenu immediately. Ultimate from the mid laner, not going to find a home. Vulcan ult doesn't find anything either. But Barracuda is now left by himself to fight against two, and that's not going well for him. He and Jake will fall down. Netroid gets one. Captain Twig finds Baskin, takes him up into the sky and into the waiting arms of the entirety of the Camelot Kings. The Odin will crumble.
Camelot Kings team fight is just filthy in this match. I loved what we saw there. Baskin goes in with the ring, and Barracuda generates threat simply by removing the light. Says, hey, you don't know if Vulcan ult's coming. You don't know who's just around this corner. Because of that Darkest of Night's ultimate, forces out the Phantom Shell early from Genetics. Would have been a massive win for the Olympus Bolts had they disengaged immediately afterward, but instead, Ven steps a little bit too far forward, tries to follow up at least ever so slightly on that ring, gets caught out by the wall from Genetics, loses out on both of those relics. Barracuda forced forward to peel out for his team, and from there, it was all Camelot Kings all the way down. Easy picks into an easy Fire Giant, and still plenty of gold left on the map to collect.
We walked into that Fire Giant fight with barely a 3K lead for the Camelot Kings, and well, now we're looking at 7,000 and climbing, as you highlight. 3 tier 2 towers and a tier 1 still up. Plenty of gold for the Camelot Kings to add to their pockets there. But now for the Bolts, when it comes to these defenses, what are the tools that they have to kind of repel the Kings back? Do they have anything really well to be able to maybe keep the minions out or to try and counterfight against the Kings?
Well, the game at least simplifies on base defense. You're always going to be looking at a 4-stack or a 5-stack right in front of you. So a Blink ultimate from Baskin should likely find a couple more targets than it has previously. That said, Phantom Shell will be up, and I don't imagine the Camelot Kings will wait too long on their own siege. So if that first Phantom Shell finds value, the Olympus Bolts will struggle to survive there. Might be a situation where the Bolts put up a defense around a tier 2 just to burn through that relic and then fall back to their Phoenix and try and pray that the CDR that Baskin's already established for himself is enough to get that cage back up. Forcing out a Phantom Shell this far behind is going to be difficult to do, though. The Camelot Kings, they could kind of play with the map a little bit. They can play with their HP bars and that damage. Don't need to be too concerned about the return damage from Ven, especially with this build.
Variety dives to the back line, misses the grapple. Vulcan ult doesn't find anybody. Captain Twig is looped around, and Variety is, by the way, still in the back line, fighting 3. Might lose his life because of it, though. Used the ultimate and the Onicates to lock him down. Variety only barely lives to the end, but the Phoenix goes down along with his life. And the Camelot Kings can just back away. Ring toss, and the ult in from Captain Twig. Finds the last hit of damage needed. Barracuda goes through the tornado, and he is gone. Netroid takes the kill for that one. Awesome Jake stuck in, knocked down, and not a chance that the Olympus Bolts can live through this one. It's only 2 left to fight against 4. The Titan pulled through. Lasbra goes to the back. Captain Twig finds Baskin. Netroid finds the help with the stun onto Laz, and all of the bolts are gone. They'll fall away, and the Camelot Kings take game number 1.
Man, the Bolts looked really good throughout the early portions of this match. They were matching macro. They were at least getting 1-for-1 trades. At one point, it's 5-6, and all of a sudden it's 7-8. But 1 or 2 just misplayed team fights around the Pyromancer. That 21, 22-minute mark really did crush the Olympus Bolts. The Camelot Kings established pace early in this game, and there really wasn't too much fight back from the Bolts. A couple of misplays around the blink in from RDO and Vulcan ult combo may have changed the game had those connected, but it's very difficult to put the entire match on the onus of just a couple of interactions.
Yeah, it's not really an interaction, a combo we get to see very often. I mean, specifically because Vulcan hasn't really been in the meta up until just recently. Jake doesn't have a whole lot of practice on RDO from what we can tell there. So a little bit of miscommunication in that end, a little bit of misplay out there, but at least some fight back from the Olympus Bolts early, trying to keep this game even. Points that they were down 2,000-3,000 gold, able to at least shore that one back up. So the Bolts showing that they still have some fight, but I think you're right. When it came down to the team fight to the Camelot Kings, especially that last one around the Pyromancer, Camelot Kings just able to pull that one out. We'll take a quick little break, and when we come back, game number 2 between the Bolts and the Kings.
Gore laughing at the demise of the Olympus Bolts here in game number 1. No, he's not. Don't worry, Bolts fans. Not biased casters up here on the desk.
I'm laughing at Zeus. He's just like, he's chilling. He's got
We're
elevator
laughing
music
at
playing.
how
And the world
jacked,
around him is
yeah,
dying.
Unbelievable. How jacked Zeus is while watching the world crumble around him. I'm not sure he could fit in one of the player jerseys. Those things fit nice and snug. Luckily, he is absurdly jacked, and everyone. Oh, no, this is mean. Now this is a mean ad. Never mind. Skulls. They've got
he's
some good
godly
jerseys.
jacked.
He's
Normal
godly.
human
There we go.
jacked
Oh,
is
you
just
saved
impossible
me,
to
Gore.
attain.
You saved me. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. That's right.
You, a regular human jacked, could fit in
Could
any
fit
of
in
these
any
jerseys.
of these jerseys. That's absolutely right. God, you are so good at your job, Gore. It's unbelievable. Head on over to shop.hi-rezstudios.com/SPL and get your hands on one of our new look Phase 3 jerseys for our teams here in Season 9. Bunch of great upgrades, of course. Thanks to Skulls for powering our merch, powering our players, and getting some jerseys that fit real nice on normal human forms.
Yeah, and you know what? I now have I want to almost a challenge because Benny Hughes he's been bulking up. I want to see if he can break out of his jersey one day. I think that'd be kind of.
I bet he could. You know, because they're supposed to be nice and form fitting. I bet he could flex.
That's
and
the
rip
best
out.
example of it fitting normal human jacked.
Right. Correct.
He deadlifts like 2 of me, and that's impressive.
It is very, very impressive. At any rate, Benny Q and the rest of the Valhalla Valkyries will be in action later on this weekend in their new look jerseys. You can get your hands on those as well. But we got to talk about game number 1 here, Gore Miser, and it's the Bolts keeping pace with the Camelot Kings for a while. But then as Mifflin and J-Mac point out, ultimately the macro game just kind of catches up here. I mean, when it gets to be shot calling time, when we're in real objective, towers can start dying, state of SMITE, Bolts just fell too far behind.
Yeah, the way I would describe it is the Bolts were really scrappy for a lot of the early game, and scrappy for the early game gets you a lot of stuff, right? It can give you pressure on some objectives, things like that. It did not translate into any team fight play, right? I think that they were scrappy when it's picks and early game oriented, and then the minute it transitioned into actual team play, everything fell apart. And unfortunately for them, it's not even as much as them falling apart as it is that the Kings just had a really good draft that plays to their strengths so incredibly well. I think you get, first off, Netroid has been literally untouched that entire fight, and he's getting all of that damage out there. But you can look at Big Man Tings as well. Very, very high health bar. Even when some damage is getting thrown their way, they've got a lot of CC that's coming from Twig, from Genetics, and from Variety, when Variety's alive. That just makes it so much easier for the team to walk forward. I mean, you know, you're talking about carries that are either untouched or mostly untouched, and it's because at any given point you've got peel for them, and then that peel can turn into turnaround potential. It's kill potential on all of them. I mean, a really readily available wall, freeze from Ymir. You got the stun coming from the Naja, plus the ult, plus all of the lockdown that a Mulan brings. I just think that team fight wise, especially in narrow jungle corridors, they had a team that was going to pick apart the Bolts very easily unless things went perfect on the other side.
Yeah, and look, you know, like if you look at draft, it's not like the Bolts gave the Kings anything egregious.
Yeah, what
right?
are you gonna ban Kukul Khan?
Right.
No.
Right. It's like a perk, but it works so well where if it's not the Naja Sash, it's the Ymir wall. If it's not the Ymir wall, it's some lockdown from the Mulan.
Yep.
Like, you know, there's just simply too much.
If it's not that, maybe you're just getting mezzed by the Ishtar.
Right. Maybe the Ishtar is locking you in place. That's a good game from Lasbra, right? Lasbra puts up a lot of the kills here for the Olympus Bolts at 5-4 and 3, but a quiet game from the rest of the Olympus Bolts. They gave themselves a chance out of picks and bans, which is what we asked. Can they do the same here in game number 2? That is the next step now for the Olympus Bolts to try to bounce back into this set, because Gore, at some point, it's got to be disheartening, where you hang in these sets for the first 20 or so minutes. You're thinking you've got a real good chance. And then in 5 minutes, the game just gets swept away from you because the Kings are just that good at shot calling, that good at macro play. I don't know. Look, I'm not gonna assume too much based on body language, but there's some quiet faces in there, arms crossed. I'm sure discussion right now centered around picks and bans. I don't know how animated you really get when picks and bans are going on, but this is a Bolts team. You can tell there's some frustration.
Yeah.
With the spiral that's happened here in Phase 3. I mean, just such a sudden drop. And I think they'll be all right? I mean, as far as moving towards the end of the phase, maybe Phase 3 playoffs. they don't fully turn it around. You know, you're talking about the play-ins against the SEC teams later on this year. I think this Bolts team will be okay.
Yeah.
But it's a long road back right now, and hopefully in Game 2 here against the Kings, you can start to put some of those bricks back in place.
And I got to give them credit because they've only gotten Cabrakan twice. But the one time that they won with him, it was a first-pick game. They locked him in. It was the only first-pick game that they've won otherwise. And so I think that this is a really good start for him, right? You're coming in with something strong. Admittedly, I do think that we've seen more capable counterplay to a Cabrakan, but what does he bring to the team fight? It's a lot of CC and the capability. Like, I think Mifflin described it yesterday as like, did I get close to you? Cool. I'm going to just chunk you down. Like that idea of like, if I can get within 5 feet of you, that's my win condition late game. I'm able to do that and can contribute a lot to the team. We also see it be very flexible. I mean, in technicality, we have seen it 4 out of the 5 roles, right? We've seen it solo, jungle, mid, and support. So it keeps some ambiguity. Realistically, 2 of those are going to be what we've been watching it more recently, right? Solo and then in support. But support has been the go-to more often than not. So it's very easy to maybe take a guess and assume that this is going to be Jake that plays it. But having that flexibility around for your team just means that you can watch what the Kings provide and try to sidestep it a little bit for yourselves.
I kind of smirk at the Horus because what better pick than a Horus for a team that likes to play like the Camelot Kings do, where, of course, your team fighting is very consistent, but map mobility being one of the cornerstones of the way the Camelot Kings play SMITE, and genetics obviously very good at initiating with Horus.
Yes.
But just moving the team around the map, it just makes it easier to do what the Kings want to be doing anyway. I think AMC plus Horus scores a fantastic 1-2 here to start off the draft for the Kings.
And there was one, I think it was Kings Warriors, where genetics had played the Horus and makes a play with the ult. Like, again, I think what we used to hear not even a long time ago, I guess, on Horus's release, for a very initial thoughts on him, has almost always been, yeah, he's got a really great kit, the ult's hard to use.
Right.
And sometimes that's been true, sometimes it's not been. I think that we've gotten to see enough plays with it. We've seen plays where a team focuses up, forces a defense to mount up on the left side Phoenix or the right side Phoenix, and then they Horus ult to the other side. We saw a Kings play just a couple weeks ago where they're getting aggressive against the Warriors. They get a Gold Fury or a Primal Fury, one of the Furies, and then they Horus ult over to the Pyromancer immediately to make sure that there's no way the Warriors were going to be able to answer 1-for-1 in that trade. And now you're talking about a 9-10 patch where Gold Furies are a little easier to kill earlier on in the game, and specifically more valuable than Pyromancers as well. So even going for those trades isn't going to value people. But having that kind of traversal, if you're the Kings and you get a decent early lead here, I 100% think that they're going to be able to push all of that with this ult.
So Cabrakan gets picked, as well as Thor. Now, lots of rumblings about Thor. Where's Thor's place in the meta going to be?
Yeah. All it took is a little tiny tweak. He actually had a good chunk there on the patch notes, didn't he?
I was for sure that it was going to be Thor all the time, right? With the way that it was being talked about. Could it be, though? I mean, this style of pick from Lasbra, how dynamic Thor can be. This could be the type of pick that helps the Olympus Bolts and find some mobility, some momentum earlier on in the game.
Sorry, I'm just thinking of 9-10.
It's okay.
And I genuinely can't wait for Maui to be in competitive.
See,
the fact that we have to wait for that, I understand it. It makes a lot of sense.
Maui's gonna be so cool.
But it's gonna be so fun to watch.
My brain, it's okay. My brain, every time Thor gets locked in, immediately goes to Worlds, and how excited I am for that. Because Thor at Worlds still is just like peak. I'm begging a player to play Thor in a game that I'm casting.
Because
I just love it.
We were doing Paladins for 2019. I'm trying to think back if any of those games had a Thor in it.
Season 6 at DreamHack Atlanta.
But as someone who watched, when adapting was winning with the Thor, the audio that you get when Thor dunks and when he spins and when the hammer double tap, it's just different.
Well, and I think you talk about crowd reaction, right? So often an Anvil of Dawn is either initiating a fight from out of nowhere or or the jungler is joining a fight a bit later on from out of nowhere. And so you talk about crowd reaction, the sudden dunk in that either finishes, continues, or totally flips a fight. And just everyone's like, oh my God, suddenly there's a Thor here. Can't be understated. All the audio, the crowd, all of it. So it's okay. Your brain went to your brain went to 9-10. My brain went to Worlds. I was all over the place.
Well,
and now look
it
at us,
went to
we're totally-
9-10 because like he got some
No, he
really
did.
good buffs.
My point being, neither of us kept our brain.
No,
on,
yeah, it was
on
not.
picks and
It was
bans.
not picks and bans oriented.
Let's catch back up though, Gore.
Okay, and then I'm going to talk about that Thor.
Okay, yeah, please do. Olympus ends up getting locked in here for Captain Twig. It's been a very popular pick for him. Couple knockups. Hopefully that Twig will be able to follow up on. And then a Kernanos rounds out the top 3 for the Bolts.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see this. I honestly, just because of the Thor. I think Kernanos banned out last time around. It makes a lot of sense when it has been making the runs in mid as well as it has been. But the Thor is the one that is most eye-catching for us, right? Because not only was it recently buffed, but I think that he's a very good playmaker in the right moments.
Huh.
It can also fall apart pretty quickly. The things that changed about him, and the things that I think are really important immediately, his max mana costs for his hammer throw is now like barely higher than it was starting before. So now all of a sudden your hammers are a lot easier to throw out. You're able to do that. That gives you mobility, survivability, and just damage. But also, yeah, the big one, the wall now does damage.
Yeah.
And there's like a lot of little things with that. Yeah, it's just a little bit of extra damage that you're going to have whenever you stun somebody on top of that. But also, like, over walls, all of a sudden, you know
visually,
which side they're
right.
on, you know where they are, things like that. So I think there's a lot of fun play potential. Some of it might not even happen this game. Who knows? Maybe he just gets bodied. Maybe he comes out and he's the reason the Bolts win. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch to see if he belongs in the meta now.
Luckily, up to this point, Thor hasn't like completely taken over. I was gonna say maybe it's actually the worst timing for Worlds if Thor suddenly is like unbeatable and then gets nerfed just prior to Worlds and then we don't see him at all. That'd be worst case scenario for me. So maybe somewhere in the middle is a nice happy medium.
Yeah, put out the shrine to aggro and
Right.
pray to it. Make sure that no nerfs happen.
Right,
that
he's
are too
a
egregious.
caster at heart, so he knows.
Yeah.
He knows.
He'll
but
be
he
like,
keeps-
I know what these guys want to watch.
Right, they want to keep the Worlds meta around. Ardio, the final pick, alongside Baron, the final pick here for the Olympus Bolts, something that Ven has played in the past. 2-1-2 rather in a loss against the Jade Dragons the last time we saw this Baron Samti. Do you think susceptible, though, to what the Camelot Kings have drafted?
I mean, you're still looking at someone, he's got relatively decent, at least for him, CC immunity in a
Right.
way, like at least on his ult. So I think if you're going like 1-for-1, he could kind of survive a wheelish, but nowhere near, I think, the level. There's a lot of foot traffic that's going to be going through mid lane. You might have some counterplay on the wheelish. There's not a lot of other knockups. I mean, the Horus, once they join the 3v3, is going to be a very consistent form for that. So eventually, I think you're going to be burning a lot of beads and having a little bit of trouble. But you've got some good bodies next to you, right? Kabrakan's going to allow you to play aggressively. I think Baron is going to have enough damage to play aggressively. And so there's a little bit of flexibility in mid lane. I definitely am still favoring the Kings, I think, in totality.
You have
I
to,
just
right?
think that the way that they've kind of built their composition, and specifically the way that their jungle mid support 3v3 works together, very similar to the last time, where it just feels better than what the Bolts have. The Bolts have 3 decent picks that'll be fighting together. The Kings have synergy.
The Kings have momentum. They've got a lot here going into game number 2. Can the Bolts right the ship? Do we go on to a game 3 to start off our weekend? All those questions and more get answered in game number 2 with J-Mac in Mifflin.
The Bolts have got to pull it together here. They've had good early starts in their last few matchups, but they've got to find a way to transition that to the mid and to the late game, because look at the composition that the Camelot Kings have drafted Mifflin. This double hunter, a wheelish, get those auto attacks late game. Objectives are going to be pretty easy to go down for the Kings, and they were getting them pretty easy objectives before, but Barracuda in danger. Beads gone, knocked up, rooted in place, and a pre-31st blood goes to the Camelot Kings.
Yeah, I didn't turn around fast enough. Did Barracuda level his dash? Doug, help us out. Let me see Barracuda's abilities here. No. My man put a point into Bramble Blast. Early Barracuda. You've been playing this game since 2010. We can't be doing that. Gets caught out, loses his life, loses his beads as well against a high-pressure lane like Horus and Ho Yi. That is not an ideal start for a team that I think is in a position where they need some ideal starts.
In a word, tough. It's going to be a tough lane for Barracuda.
I'd say tragic.
Well, that's another way we could go about it. We can keep going with more single words if we want to, but at least for now, Lasbro and Baskin are going to have to change up their pace, at least as far as the opposite side through. As we are now shown here, Tectonic Rift, the stun on Thor. If you missed the last patch notes that came out and the last patch that just dropped this past week, a little bit of damage on that stun. And I think Gore brought up a really nice little point, which was it's not really probably going to make that much of an impact immediately right out, but as far as these kind of pokes over walls, you know, where you can't see them goes, now you have at least a little bit of guidance depending on when you see that number pop.
What makes Tectonic Rift so much better, and I think it would be about as good as it is now, even if it only did 1 damage, is the fact that it now applies in-hand effects. It applies Crusher procs, it gives you Heartseeker procs, it gives you all that, which is just incredibly powerful. The actual damage output of Tectonic Rift, even at max rank, is what, 100, 110? That's not exactly impressive.
No.
It's just that ability, or the ability rather, to have one more ability that can proc those in-hands.
We can.
Or item effects, rather.
True. We can take a look back at that first blood just to kind of see what even happened. Because by the time we had turned around, it was already half HP onto Barracuda. It's just a full team gather. He and Jake walked up a little too far to try and get some wards. Quick blinks in, and because he picked up Bramble Blast right away, didn't have the dash to try and get away once that root, or once anything came through. Only about another 30 seconds till his beads are back up. Genetics and Netroid haven't really put the most pressure on towards him in this lane just yet.
You sure?
Yet. And then as soon as I say it, we see a dash in, at least by Netroid. Going for this double Hunter comp. This is something the Camelot Kings and the Oni Warriors have been doing, but they've always been doing it, and especially this 4-Fizz, when they've got this AMC piloting in the mid lane.
Yeah, just that Stinger having the defense shred on it so valuable, especially with a composition built like the Camelot Kings have got. Gore brings up synergy, and I think it's a very good topic of conversation because of how they're going to approach these team fights. It's always single target initiation. Genetics locks down 1 with the Fracture, goes for the knock-up on whoever's nearby. Captain Twig pulls in 1 with the Gravity Surge. The real only consistent AoE CC is going to be Variety with that Roar. Otherwise, that one guy who's getting CC'd is also getting all of his defense shredded and 2 Hunters staring him down the entire time. So I think the Camelot Kings have got themselves a composition that is going to function very well, but is high execution. Anytime you are generally single target in nature, you need to make sure that's the right target every single time, and it's difficult to find the right target in team fights, especially at the highest caliber of play, which is exactly what this is.
Variety's dashed down. Lasper here. But Variety gets caught on the wrong side of the wall, so no further follow-up beyond there. Variety will be just fine. But if I do remember correctly, when the Kings were playing this one, it was a very low kill game for them going towards late. I think they were sitting somewhere around like 3 kills to 5, which is about par for a Camelot Kings game usually. But essentially all of their late game wins did come from big man Tings, pick who you want to kill, and we'll just funnel everything into that person. It was almost always a tank in that regard. And that Stinger was able to put in some good work. So we'll see if the Kings reprise that in this game. It's Captain Twig in the mid lane trying to get some poke onto Venenu. And I think kind of going in this mid lane matchup, keeping that discussion going there, we have not seen very much success out of this Baron mid from I believe it's 2 different players who have tried to bring this one out.
Yeah, you don't even have to say players. Just in general, Baron mid just has not been the most successful. Largely a mobile mage that acts as an initiator with his ultimate. It is so hard to play around, especially if you want to itemize towards actual damage. Because of how life of the party works and you're pulling someone in towards you and it's generally a frontliner who's saying, oh, sick, I'm moving at the guy I want to get on faster all of a sudden. It is so hard to pick your opportunities with that ability. We could see Ven lean a little bit more so towards a Bruiser style build. If that's the case, would really sacrifice a good deal of the follow-up that Lasbra is going to need off of the back of his own ultimate. I'm curious to see how Ven decides to pilot this one. It's just not a very easy way to play the game. I would much prefer to see Ven on one of his standard selections or a standard mage that's got some sort of form of mobility, because it's a pretty dive-heavy composition from the Camelot Kings. Captain Twig has great gap close with Suku. Variety's always going to be running you down in the bear form. Genetics with that global presence going to teleport his entire team right to you. You'd kind of hope you got something to get out of there, and Baron Samedi just simply hasn't.
So it might be a difficult matchup for Venenu. We'll have to see how the rest of his build goes from here, because he started up something different entirely. Normally we've been seeing either the Warlock staff or a Book of Thoth be built up first item for those mages. Even a Doom Orb in some regards. Baskin engaged on the right-hand side.
Should be okay.
Cripple field there. He's got his ultimate. He's going back in because in the sky is Thor. Dunks down, just misses out on the landing there. Captain Twig and Variety will be fine for the moment.
Man, just out of range there. Baskin dives a little too far forward. Variety does the exact same thing. 3-man stun. Should make his way out of there. A double knockup helps out a lot.
Pull in onto Laz. Wall will stun Variety. Another wall from Jake. But are you in the cage with him or is he in the cage with you? It's a 1-kill trade out. The Olympus Bolts find the pick. 3 very low in HP, but no further follow-up from the Camelot Kings means the Bolts get away with their 1.
If I'm Twig right there, I'm getting really frustrated. Like, Variety, dude, just walk out, man. Just get out of this initiation. You don't need to take this fight. We've already stripped away so many resources from the Bolts. They use Lazarus' ultimate, Baskin's ultimate as well. Just seems like a situation that was largely avoidable, but Variety always wanted to dig in his heels and play aggressively. The Camelot Kings call him the most stubborn player in the league for a reason. Does cost him his life this time around. A phenomenal ultimate from Awesome Jake. Locks him in. Jake also tanks up the tower very well to make sure that his allies make it out alive immediately afterward. But we did miss out on it. Ven loses his beads from a gank from Genetics, so the Camelot Kings at least able to answer a bit of that pressure elsewhere on the map.
Kind of going back to the point I was trying to bring up earlier was that Venenu hasn't gone for a traditional start in mid, hasn't gone for stacking, hasn't gone for Doom Orb. Instead elected to go for a very early Divine Ruin. Do you think that that affects maybe some of the build path that Venenu takes? Do you think that he can even go for a stacking item, or it seems he's just going to forego those entirely?
Yeah, it looks like the standard OG double flat pen start, right, with this Magic Focus in the second slot. There's a lot of sustain on the side of the Camelot Kings, so Divine Ruin certainly will find some value, be it up against Genetics or Netroid with the new Devourer's Gauntlets or Variety in some of these team fights. So won't argue against it too much, but I probably would have liked to see maybe a Warlock staff to alleviate some of those pains we were talking about just a moment ago where you need some form of survivability, and a large 400 HP infusion is exactly that. Not going to see it this time, though, as he has decided to go down that Magic Focus tree.
So double pen, whether that's double flat, or maybe it turns into an Obsidian Shard. We've yet to see. We'll have to wait until he gets a little bit more gold in hand to be able to figure that one out.
Would be wild if it was Op Shard.
I mean, he gets him his percent pen early, but for now, at least, we'll be at least getting the single flat pen item with that Divine Ruin. And it's a change up for Barracuda now in his build as well. Last time we saw him go for the Transcendence. This time, mirroring what Netroid's going with. Devourer's Gauntlets on both sides. But it's a Death's Toll for Barracuda versus the Cowl for Netroid. Awesome Jake pulled back in. Frenzy pop, but unfortunately, from the knockup after, the stun does not connect. Up into the skies, Genetics. Dunk down is Lazbra. Shield will get them out. Jake goes in. The double walls lock away Captain Twig and separate Genetics. But Netroid dives in. Big Man Tings is here, and Jake is not there any longer. Put in the dirt with the Stinger and the combo after.
Man, that ultimate from Genetics was just perfect. Starts charging it before Lazbra even lands. So Captain Twig's able to make his way out of there, gets the HP shield, buys time for the Suku to come back up, and jumps over the wall. If Genetics is a second or a half second later with that to the skies, that entire fight probably turns on its head. Lazbra would have found such a phenomenal ultimate in exchange. Great play from the support on the side of the Camelot Kings. Loving what we've been seeing from Genetics all day today.
Genetics has been on point and back onto a signature pick of his. I mean, when I think back into some of the older seasons of SMITE when Genetics was kind of first making his strides in the minor league and then up into the SPL, it's been off the back of his horse, and we've been able to see what he can do even still this day and age around. I mean, he was the player who single-handedly got that ultimate nerfed years back after it had gotten buffed and went,
yeah, hate him for that, by the way.
Probably don't want you to buff that ability, but we're still seeing him make very similar plays. I mean, he'll make a play where a team takes a Phoenix on one side or maybe doesn't take it, waits for a minion wave, and takes it all the way across the map to a different bird to try and take that down. We've seen him make the backdoor plays just a couple weeks back. I believe it was against the Solar Scarabs, where he goes in from the jungle, dives into the Titan. It's a player and a god combination that is just so threatening across, and I'm ready to see what team is able to truly handle up what he's able to do with it.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how he decides to pace around it as well. The Des brought up the neutral objective play style that To the Skies affords you, where you can group up on a Pyromancer and make sure you're at the Gold Fury, or maybe start to vie your position towards a Pyro, then all of a sudden you're actually at the Gold Fury. A very tricky god to be sure to lock down on the map, and one that affords you so much interesting macro play, and the Camelot Kings certainly no stranger to that style of play at that. But as of now, seems the Kings have slowed down their pace a little bit. The Olympus Bolts, I suppose, happy to have this breather as well. This Pyromancer pulled out and taking a peek at the map. I don't think the Bolts are going to do a whole lot about it. 3 members go back to base at the exact same time. Classic mistake. Can't leave the map open like that. The Camelot Kings will punish you for it with extreme ease. Pyromancer, absolutely for free.
Gold Fury may be on the plate as well. Got a double Hunter and a Wheelish and then a Frenzy from your support. Means those auto attackers are going to be doing a lot more. But there is vision on the Gold Fury pit, so it might be a moment before we see. Oh, actually it could just be now since the vision has faded before I even got a chance to finish the sentence about it. With the Trebuchet in mid, Camelot King's attention has been diverted just slightly. Big Man Tings will be there to try and help deal with that one. Make sure he doesn't lose too much damage, or too much HP, I should say, on his mid tower. Fight onto Barracuda, gets the beats from the Cernanos, and too much damage in. It's a dunk from Laz that finds 2, but doesn't find a way out, throws the hammer the wrong way. But Venenu able to find 1. A pick onto Captain Twig, makes it a 2-for-1 trade, but an unfortunate misplay from Lazarus throwing the hammer the wrong direction now sets up for a Fury for the Kings.
The Kings have pulled it, 50%. Where's Baskin? He's pushing a tower in mid, needs to get there quick.
Jake gets stunned out, knocked away. Gold Fury still goes to the Kings. Thin margins, 1 more hit onto Awesome Jake. The Bees are not enough.
They got it.
It's got to take a bounce. It's got to take a couple of autos from Genetics. But Variety 1v1ing against Venenu and winning this battle. Not enough healing in the world for the Baron to fight against Variety, and Baskin cannot stop Genetics and Big Man Tings. A Fury +4 at the end go to the Kings.
Just such a major desync from the Olympus Bolts in shot calling there. If Awesome Jake is going to defend the Gold Fury, why is Baskin pushing mid? If Baskin's pushing mid, why is Ven trying to push in on his own to get to the Gold Fury pit? Just mass miscommunication all the way across the board, not even taking into account the micro misplays of Lasbra throwing a hammer into the wall, of Barracuda getting caught out into the jungle. And these small cavalcade of misplays will stack up very quickly against a team like the Camelot Kings, who've established themselves a massive lead just 13 minutes into this one. The Olympus Bulls need to clean up this play if they want to get back into this game.
Olympus Bolts down about 3,500 gold so far this early on. A very nice start of a lead for the Camelot Kings in this early game. Been able to find a Pyro, been able to find a Gold Fury, and just clean kills and clean fighting after. But maybe, as you say, more so based off the sloppy miscommunications and plays by the Bolts throughout these fights. Jake on the way over, but this is a level 8 Kabrakan. Not sure he's going to be able to do too much against level 13 Artio, who is nearly 3 items deep into the build already. Variety, complete control on the right side of the map. Mid lane belongs to Big Man Tings right now, 1-0-2 on this Amusing Cobb. And it's managed to find the pick onto Awesome Jake just earlier on.
Yeah, Jake cannot afford to spend time hovering in the jungle trying to get involved in a fight. You are no longer a secondary jungler for your team. You're not allowed to play the aggressive styling that Kabrakan is known for when you're into this kind of deficit. Jake needs to find some farm.
Well, they at least get beads from Captain Twig,
that's good.
So that's a good start. Means that this Wheelish can't really stay in the back line too long.
What a blink.
Baskin goes for the Yulp, but Variety's blink just a little bit faster than that first swipe. So that's another ultimate down, but decent CDR, at least out of Baskin, means it'll come up pretty quickly.
Thor's up.
Lasbra in the sky, dunked down just a little shy of Big Man Tings, but a pre-beads just in case the range was there. Now the B is the one who's a little bit susceptible in mid.
Yeah, unfortunate for Tings, punished for being good at the game, pre-beads, but not quite in range was Lasbra. So Laz finds value regardless of the actual positioning of that ultimate. Want to see someone make use of those beads being down. Sure, AMC's still got the Aegis, but CC can go a whole long way.
Stinger hits Jake, who walks back in. Netroid's here, finds the bounce. Wall from Laz, Sun's rain down.
Yeah.
Captain Twig on top. And Awesome Jake in the dirt once more. And Venenu may be following soon as he is yanked back in. And Netroid picks up the kill, 8-2. Maybe more. Variety pushing in, but there's nobody else around for now. It'll be a tier 1 tower +2.
Ugly, ugly play there from the Olympus Bolts. Jake's decision to walk back in, questionable at best. What's the best case follow-up scenario there with the members of the Olympus Bolts that were in range? A double tap from Lasbra. That's decent damage. It's not going to kill anybody outright. Maybe a little bit of damage from Ven. You don't want Ven stepping that far forward against that many members of the Camelot Kings, because that's exactly what happens. Ven tries to follow up on Jake CC, dies for it. Jake continues to die regardless. The Olympus Bolts, they look lost, J-Mac. They are really struggling to find some footing anywhere on the map.
It almost kind of makes you wonder a little bit, Miff, because, again, for the Bolts, the only change that got made was Haddix for Baskin.
Haddix was a major shot caller.
But you got to imagine then, if that's the case, was Haddix that crucial of a player for this team that the Bolts are now crumbling through, or maybe was there something else along with it that kind of coupled to it? Because ever since Haddix has been gone from this team, even with the performances Baskin's been able to put on,
still level 8.
It has just been, it's just been a lot of nothing, really, from the Olympus Bolts. I think it's the only way that I can put it. They've gotten a single set win against the Scarabs, and that went to a full 3-game set. And that was a broken Scarabs, too. That was we just lost our jungler. We'd also just lost our support and had to change someone else in. And the Bolts were even struggling up against that team.
Yeah, the Bolts need to figure something out. In situations like this, lean on your veterans. Barracuda has been around the scene for as long as the scene has existed. And in a meta right now where I feel like ADCs are actually pretty powerful, maybe he can get involved in some of these fights a little bit earlier. Maybe they can start to rally around this duo lane, have him be a more proactive shot caller for this team, because right now it just feels like the Olympus Bolts are lacking a voice on the map. Fortunately for the Camelot Kings and their fans, that's awesome for them.
Jake stun, thrown up, being back by Captain Twig. Needs a little bit more damage to get the kill with the Suns. That'll slow him down a little, but Variety is already here. Stunned out from his channel. It's awesome, Jake, just tanky enough to live, but I think a lot of that is just because no Stinger from Big Man Tings. Also, no Big Man Tings to be a part of that fight. All that physical damage mitigated by the build that Jake has. And an Oni Fury not even given a chance to stand on the map or a chance for the Bolts to fight back into it. It is gone instantly.
Yeah, the Camelot Kings may have not gotten the kill, but they at least do enough damage to Jake that he's not allowed to face check the Gold Fury. The Camelot Kings also sheepdog the Olympus Bolts 4-stack into a tier 2 tower, so it's simple. The Kings don't need to rotate to the Gold Fury and wonder, where do we need to defend from? Where could the Olympus Bolts possibly come from? They're in their tier 2. If they're going to come from us, they're coming from the front. So the Camelot Kings pull the Fury and say, no response, and whoever phase checks is going to get a Stinger right into their phase. So Olympus Bolts didn't really have too many opportunities to fight back in right there, barring maybe a Hail Mary ultimate from Lasbra. And we are now so far removed from a state of parity insofar as golden experience that I think Lasbra might just have to start using this ultimate to kamikaze into some of these objectives. The Camelot Kings cannot be allowed to continually pressure the map. They cannot be allowed to just get richer and richer simply by existing. The Olympus Bolts need to find somewhere, be it split push, be it Hail Mary ultimates, be it Hail Mary just objective pools. The Bolts need something on the map.
They got to make it here. Maybe right now might be their only opportunity, but it's 5 versus 4. No Big Man Tings means a lot of DPS could be thrown to the wayside. Jake goes in against 4, finds a stun on 2, but same as last time, gets yanked right back
Good
in.
God.
Netroid gets the pick. Big Man Tings now joins the fray. Fire Giant could be on the menu for the Kings if they choose to go towards the objective, as Variety zones 2 away to start it out.
I like the idea from Jake. Had he had 4 more levels right there, it might have worked out.
Baskin thrown up, and even Baskin is not tanky enough. A dunk in by Lasbra, but it's all pulled away. Variety still lives through it. The
Very
shield
low.
was just enough. A stun to hold him back, and Genetics takes down Lasbra. The Camelot Kings all live through the fight.
Genetics does it again. Lasbra finds a phenomenal ultimate, starts to spin, says, look, I found 3. This is great, guys. Best team fight start we've had so far this game. They're all stunned. I'm going to berserker my barrage all over them. Certainly doesn't happen when Genetics just teleports them 5 feet to the right and you miss your entire kit immediately afterwards. Salt in the wound that Variety gets to stare you down as you're shoved 6 feet underground at 5 HP. The entire time. The Camelot Kings are styling on them.
Fire Giant started once again. Jake level 10 on the Cabrakan. Cooldown, or I should say respawn timer, very low for this player, but their respawn timer is not going to help much. Captain Twig finds another one. The blink knock up into the pole. Jake in the ground once again. 0-5 on the support. 3-1-7 for Captain Twig. And the Olympus Bolts on the wrong side of the map. The Camelot Kings are shoving down right. Tier 2 gone. Phoenix shortly after. And the Bolts aren't even responding. None of them are going back to stop this.
I'm going to be completely honest with you, J-Mac. They can't stop it. Their hands are not on the levers of power. They have to stop this one. Someone needs to get back to base. Barracuda, very late to this one.
But all 5, even Jake, who had just died,
welcome back, bud,
has come back to life.
Good
and
wall.
We'll stop Variety. Stun is good.
Good wall.
Wall keeps him off. The door is already closed, but Variety has just enough legs to go through. The coffin will hold him in place for
going?
Barracuda to get the pick. But look at this. Genetics is taking the rest of his team to the left. Lasbra's the only one who can get there in time.
That can't work.
Finds the double stun. Captain Twig, though, on the wrong side of the wall. Lasbra not able to find the damage.
Looks
the
good.
bolts are on the way in. Basket on the horse. Dismounts. Finds Captain Twig. Double tap just off the mark. A stun by Genetics will keep Veneno at bay, but Barra and Jake wrapping around the back.
Barra and Jake may have got all the way around, but Barracuda takes a whole lot of damage early on, down to 10%. Jake trying to step forward, but my man is level 10.
Genetics in the middle of 3 does go down. That's a good turnaround, but Captain Twig finds another. Lasbra picks off the jungler. Netroid is losing this boxing match, but Big Man Tinks all by himself is fighting against 3. It's a double kill for the B.
No.
It's a triple. It's a quadra kill. Big Man Tings has shut down the Olympus Bolts and is the only man standing.
Big Man Tinks does it all on his own. The Camelot Kings are playing with their food and eventually still partake of the meal. That is absolutely astronomical odds. The Olympus Bolts are handed away back into the game and fumble it around one tiny little B boy. That is
That's
free
a big
casting.
B. I don't know what
ANC.
you're on about, man.
No, you're 5-0-8. You're absolutely correct, man. The Camelot Kings, even had they gotten clean wiped there, let's talk miracle situation. What if it's Lasbra who finds a 5-man dunk pentakill? What's the best case for the Olympus Bolts? A tier 2 tower, maybe? Maybe a Phoenix immediately afterward. The Camelot Kings are allowed to make these wild plays, these crazy 1,000% or 2% odd plays around that left side Phoenix because they know the opportunity cost is so incredibly low. Even with Fire Giant being taken off of 4, I think the Kings can group up and just start their siege regardless.
Big Man Tings and Yikes take the Fury, and we can take a moment and a breather to look back at the quadra kill from Big Man Ting's perspective. Who was the one that he didn't get during that fight? Because we know the 3 that were so low at the end that he didn't grab. Yeah, who's the one who grabbed it? So Captain Twig, he got the one. Captain Twig managed to take 1 at the very beginning, but I mean, look at the damage output on this B. Just
free casting.
Zoning away. Nobody's paying attention until just now when they all realize that he's still left at the end of it all. The laughs after. Big Man Tings deserves all those laughs. 5-0-8 on the Amusing Cobb and nearly topping the damage charts for his team. Where is Genetics going? Okay, I was wondering how far he was going to take that ultimate. Goes from Pyromancer to Scorpion Pit.
Yeah, that pit didn't stand a chance, not with Genetics on the scene.
Is that the first time that's been picked up?
Dude, Griffin Wing's not as bad as it once was, but I promise you, I do not think it's good. Don't get used to seeing this one, all right? Griffin Wing is no longer the meme that it once was, but it's just not the best thing to pick up on the planet. I guess it might fill a similar role that Silver Branch used to with some of the changes, the nerfs to Silver Branch. Maybe you can slot Griffin Wing, and if anyone's going to do it, it's Ho Yi because of how the Mark of the Golden Crow works. You're just already dealing so much damage to low HP targets, but I'm not a massive fan. Can we get a Netroid POV here? His auto attacks are going to go so fast.
They are 40% faster. Fun fact, it also stacks with when you're using
shoot
Ishtar.
one out, man. Stop. Look at that.
Actually, that deceptively quick. Sometimes you forget just how fast they can fly. But we'll have to see how it at least works out. I mean, right now the Camelot Kings are 11,000 gold up. There's not much wrong that can be done from Netroid in his build at this point. Just needs to finish up that starter item and he'll be full build. But Fire Giant still down for another 15 seconds. Camelot Kings may not even need the objective to end this game if they can maybe find a couple more picks on the bolts, but
Why not go for it?
Bolts aren't even stepping out beyond. You know, we talk about the imaginary halfway point on the of the lane. This is like the 20% line right here. Like that orange buff, the speed buff, and the green buff right there. Like that's the line they've been stopping at.
Yeah, the line of scrimmage currently resides at their own back camps. The Olympus Bolts refuse to leave there, else they get accused of offsides. Camelot Kings now rallied around the Fire Giant. Send a couple back to base. Just Captain Twig. They're taking their time. The Kings realize if the Bolts take another team fight and the objective immediately afterward, in spite of a massive lead, would be enough to equalize this game. And the Kings certainly ones to not try and fumble here, showing a lot of respect to a team this far behind.
Well, right side Phoenix has respawned, so the Camelot Kings don't have an easy opening and an easy distraction for the Olympus Bolts. Maybe they don't need it. Where's Genetics going with this ultimate? Looks like it's towards the right side jungle. He's got everybody but Variety with him. No, it's not. It's right back to the Fire Giant. Variety left behind so that he could try and zone. Frenzy popped. The Bracer dropped as well. The Fire Giant gone. Awesome Jake, the only one who stepped far enough forward. The Camelot Kings now started their path in as Lasper used that Anvil of Dawn to get out of the fight.
I actually love that usage of To the Skies. Genetics steps far enough forward that everyone on the Olympus Bolts has to be concerned about the initiation, and they still might get caught by it. Both relics used by Ven. Once Genetics goes up, everyone on the Bolts that was hovering right side jungle starts to back up. They're backing up from essentially their back camps all the way to speed buff. No way they could have got to the Fire Giant in time.
Genetics tanking up the Phoenix, which will now go down. Camelot Kings with all 5 alive and healthy. Ultimate's only missing from a few players. Captain Twig's about to be right back up with how short of a cooldown it is. But the Kings are showing immense amounts of respect to the Bolts as all of them head back to base after only getting a single bird.
I mean, not much for them to really fight over from here. They've got plenty of gold in pocket to start to really push things in their favor. Not sure how much further in their favor they really need it to start actually cracking the base of the Olympus Bolts. But some significant power spikes hit now by the Bolts as well. Barracuda ticks over to level 20, gets his Death's Temper, a little bit more itemization for Awesome Jake, who has finally, over the course of the last like 16 minutes, leveled up thrice. I mean, 3 levels, pretty decent when you've only got 10 of them beforehand. But it's the Olympus Bolts grouped up heavily on this left-hand side. If the Camelot Kings are given even a moment inside of that mid Phoenix, they will remove it from the map, even with backdoor protections there. That's what a double Hunter composition is capable of. Bolts need to get back quickly if they want to defend.
Genetics and the Kings all show face in mid. Was wondering if maybe Genetics would head towards the right side and then To the Skies a minion wave over towards mid or some kind of play like that. But for now, just slowly pushing up these waves, taking their time through the jungle, even de-warding to make sure they have complete control on the upper side. With the Fury there, Netroid has started up. We'll get some help from his support and his solo laner to tank that one up so he can sustain back up. And now with the Oni Fury, the Oni Fire minions on the next spawn in on the right side, Oni minions up to mid and left. And the Kings are really slow playing this push.
They're waiting for those enhanced minions to start flooding into the base on the right-hand side. They've done a good job of keeping it pushed up. About 15 seconds from that one happening. Genetics gonna hit him with the classic mix-up. Where are we going? You don't know.
The Thorwall, though, keeps the minions with him. Lasper goes up in the sky. Genetics is all by himself, but the Phoenix is already gone. Attention has been diverted. Lasper dunks in and doesn't find anything. A pull back in. Venenu is already gone. Jake in the middle of all. Variety has found the double kill. Barracuda dashed as far as his little legs can take him, but it's just not far enough. Big Man Tings adds a 6 kill to his board. Baskin low, Baskin gone. Captain Twig is the one with the kill. And Lasbra, the lone survivor, will not be able to stop against 5. The Camelot Kings will take the set 2-0.
Just slow, methodical play from the Camelot Kings once they establish themselves that massive lead. So difficult for the Olympus Bolts to make a comeback when the Kings are showing that amount of respect. So many teams in the league from that exact same position are quote-unquote panic ending, or at least attempting to do so. The Kings say, why? Why leave it up to any risk? I don't want to go to a game 3. I came to work today, and I want to clock out a little bit early, get my job done as fast as possible. And the Kings do exactly that.
And why spend 2 games of 40 minutes to get it done when you can do it in 23 and 29, I think, respectively there. So
It's quick.
Camelot Kings, a quick, decisive game number 1. Still a very decisive game number 2. Takes a little bit longer to get there, but you can at least give Big Man Tings a shot to shine out there on the AMC. The quadra kill free cast earlier on really set up for the Camelot Kings to be able to take game number 2. That's it from us here on the cast. We'll throw it back over to Dave and Gore on the desk to break it down.
I'm not sure what more can be said now about this Kings team and this Bolts team, because two teams that have maintained their trajectory all throughout the phase so far. This one, another one in a long line of wins for the Camelot Kings. One of the most methodical teams in the SMITE Pro League. They get it done yet again up against the Olympus Bolts. Gore, I want to get the Bolts talk out of the way first. I want to end this death segment on a happy note, and that's talking about the things that the Kings have done well. But I think we aren't doing our jobs if we don't discuss another loss here for the Olympus Bolts, and another loss where it looks like a ship without a captain, a team without direction, really, is what this Bolts team feels like right now. I think they have so much talent on this squad. But again, I think it's forgivable to lose a set up against the Kings, up against the Dragons. Not many people are beating either of those two teams, but in the way it looked, I think just so hard for Bolts and their fans to feel excitement and like progress has really been made in a set like this. And on the flip side, I think worth talking about the Kings then, because everything they're doing has got to be exciting for their players, their fans, because you talk about a 1-2 punch here at the top of this league, or 1-2-3-4 punch sometimes. Camelot Kings score firmly in contention towards the top of the league, and this is another win where there's not much swing back from the opposing squad.
Yeah, I think that, you go look at the Bolts, what was it? It was 12-2 at one point. Unfortunate for them where they're looking for fights and things just aren't happening. Then they finally get a fight and Tings quadra kills them on the other side anyway. I think that there's a lot of good potential that exists in the Bolts. We've seen them at the high end, but you can definitely tell, like you said, I think ship without a captain is the right way, right? In the first game, they're scrappy, but when it gets to team play, the Kings just outscale them. This time around, they didn't even have the scrappy part. It just got to the team play, and the Kings outscaled them. So I definitely think when you look at the one side, the Kings are very much in the exact spot that maybe they'd like to be, again, ramping up as we're getting towards the end of Phase 3.
It's a great time to be doing it.
Start popping off when you start thinking about Phase 3 playoffs, talk about Road to Worlds. It's a great time to be looking good.
Great time to be there. We've had a bunch of quadra kills, 1 pentakill last week. That was the Jade Dragons, nearly a pentakill in this one as well, and it was Big Man Tings on the AMC, and he is standing by for the post-game interview.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm here with BMT, the mid laner for the Camelot Kings. First off, congrats on your 2-0 over the Olympus Bolts. And BMT, kind of give me your thoughts about the Bolts right now, because we're talking about it. You hear the death say maybe kind of a ship without a captain. You kind of feel those same sentiments towards this team.
Yeah, I think they're having a bit of a rough period right now. They're certainly all great players, but it's just a bit of a transition period moving from Haddox to Baskin, I think, for them. So maybe give them a few more weeks, and hopefully they can be back to their old selves.
Well, hopefully so. Now talk to me a little about yourself here in the mid lane. You got the AMC both games. Game number 1, you kind of just get to free cast on your own. You don't really quite have the pop-off game. You get your moments out there. Game number 2, you get the AMC again. I mean, tell me your thoughts on the Bolts letting you have that pick 2 games in a row.
Yeah, it was just it was always fun playing AMC. Good vibes. Just run around, farm, throw some honey out, get some play damage. It's just a good time, honestly. The more the merrier.
Yeah, for sure. And you look good in game number 1, look really good in game number 2. In fact, I think we get a moment to kind of look back at the quadra kill together that you were able to get there kind of at the end of that game or in the middle there. So, I mean, kind of tell me what's going through your mind in this one. You really get to sit through this game, and you really get a free caster in this fight.
Yeah, I mean, they were just all going on Royd. I'm just baiting him like the amazing player I am and just going to town, Just using Royd as a human bait. It's great. I'll do it again next week as well.
Using him as a human bait. Is that kind of just something that you guys do on your team all the time? Okay, you're our sacrifice this time in a team fight. We're going to let you go. Is this kind of the same thing that you echo in this one at the very least?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on like who's fed and like what gods you're playing, but it's good to bait your other carry, especially if you can pull stuff off like that. So.
Hey, Netro goes down for a quadra kill for you. Take that any day of the week for the mid. In fact, I think you're my fantasy mid laner, so that's a big one for me there. Big win for the Camelot Kings. Congratulations to you. I'll look you back with the team to celebrate. We'll throw it back over to the desk to close the set out.
Yeah, I shake my head. Lasbra and Ven are on my fantasy team. Not a great set for those two. Look, Big Man Tings, Camelot Kings, they've got it figured out right now. Are you laughing at me?
Yes.
Shinto got more points. No, he got 109 points
He
last
was
week
2
alone.
points off of beating your
My
entire
entire team got 111 points this last week, and Shinto alone had 109. Yeah, unlucky for me. I think that the Camelot Kings score, if you talk about trajectory of a squad, there's not a lot of weaknesses in that team's game. I mean, the Dragons, they kind of figured out. I think you run at them with pressure, and you can kind of end the game before it gets to sort of macro decision-making point. But even then, the Dragons very good later on. We'll talk about them a bit more in a minute. I think that this style of game is near perfect in every phase from the Camelot Kings. It's not like they sat on their hands and waited for this game to get 20-something minutes in.
First blood was
right
30 seconds before the timer stopped.
Yeah, right. We were at minus 20 seconds when we got first blood. And kept that pressure up all throughout the game and just made life so much easier for them. Loved the Horus pick. It's hard to say much more about the Kings at this point, Gore, because they simply steamrolled their opponents here today.
Yeah, I think that this is one where, you can talk about the Bolts as much as you want, and I'm sure that, and I've seen like the post-game discussions, things like that, and I'm sure they're going to be having some talks because they can't necessarily be happy 4 in a row that they've lost now. I think if you're looking at the Kings, you're looking at a team that has been powerful. You're looking at a team that's been powerful all year, was really powerful most of last year as well. And the question, honestly, that has been around the Kings is taking that and turning it into massive wins. Because I think, and you brought this up at one point where you were talking to Twig about what, constitutes a successful year. And it's like, if it's just winning the World Championship, like that's obviously the most successful. But you're looking at a team that has been, I would argue, incredibly successful when it comes down to their post-game stuff. Even though they haven't won something, they are very consistently top of the standings during the regular season, top in the standings when it comes to postseason stuff. I think that they're someone that you have to be worried about and have to be thinking about during the last half of this phase. Every matchup of anyone versus the Kings, they're just so difficult to deal with at this point, right? All of them have very wide god pools, so it's very easy for them to be flexible around the meta. It's very easy for them to be flexible around the 5 bans that you're going to be able to bring up to the table. And then each one of those picks has a lot of merits. I mean, we got Tings playing a Hunter, and the game before he played Kukul Khan. Like, they have nothing in common except that AMC likes to throw out abilities sometimes. His ult's really nice, and that's pretty true for Kukul Khan as well. And so I think that what you're looking at is a team that has really good shot calling, really good in-game presence, really good draft capabilities, and it is just making that consistent in-game play happen every single time. And I think that right now they're in a really good spot. They were even in a moment where 4 of them died. I mean, it's very easy to talk about the quadra kill portion of it, but like you lost 4 people on your team at the same time, and you still were in a better position. Mifflin had highlighted it where it's just like you losing there doesn't really mean anything to you, doesn't really mean anything for the Bolts. Even if they wiped the Kings and had all 5 staying up, they're only going to get a small margin back. So I think that putting themselves in that kind of position, that's what this team is really good at. It's the 5-pack of them that is just so powerful.
Bolts are going to have to de-aside the Kings, losing no one like 3 times in a row to get back into things here in game number 2. That is our first set of the weekend. Our second set of the weekend, my goodness, it's a good one. The Jade Dragons and the Atlantis Leviathans battle it out to end our day here on Friday. And then Valks versus Scarabs tomorrow morning. Gore, you and I talked about that to start off our show. Excited about that one. Then Oni Warriors and Titans, new look Titans. Stu joins the Titans as their ADC. Hurrywin joins the Solar Scarabs as support. And guess what? Those 2 teams play one another over on Sunday. And so Scarabs versus Titans on Sunday, that's one to look out for. Now the standing score will not be kind to the Olympus Bolts after a matchup like this. They fall to 1-5. The Valhalla Valkyries just above them at 1-4, and the Solar Scarabs still searching for their first win here so far this phase. And that win puts the Camelot Kings just behind the Jade Dragons. Now if the Jade Dragons lose here, the top of the standings get real interesting. You got some 5-1 teams, some 5-2 teams. See what happens with the Oni Warriors tomorrow. Really that top 4 blocks so competitive, taking things off of one another. And then 5 through 8 also have shown moments of being able to take games, take sets off any other team in the league. So down the stretch here in Phase 3, I'm expecting some really, really good SMITE.
Yeah.
Initial thoughts, though, Gore. Jade Dragons, Atlantis Leviathans, that's our next matchup. You think potential for 3 for the first time in 8 sets of SPL that we've got?
Yes, for sure, potential for 3. And, like, real quick, succinct thought, it's going to be good.
I hope so.
I mean, look, the Dragons have been on a really, really successful tear, right? They drop 1 set to the Warriors, but it's a 2-1. They look pretty good. In the first game, I think that was one of the fastest games that we had this phase. And game 2, it's at least competitive. But then as they continue, every other set has been very much in their favor. So I think they've been incredibly successful, and that might even be lowballing it a little bit.
Yep.
And then I think I look at what the Leviathans have been capable of, and specifically what their rise has been like. It feels like they're on the up and up, and after a win against the Kings last week, I think that this is a really good spot for the Leviathans to kind of cement themselves as one of the top teams and showcase that they are here to play.
Unfortunately for Kings fans, that's the one and only game that the Camelot Kings will be playing here this weekend. Good news for Bolts fans, they'll be back in action a bit later on. But have no fear, more SPL action. It is Leviathans versus Dragons right after this.